Here at GCN, we've got several videos about how to improve your FTP, your functional threshold power, which is the power that you can sustain for around about an hour.
But just how important is FTP to cycling performance? And could you be a professional road cyclist without a very high functional threshold power? It's an interesting question and probably quite a complicated topic. So what I suggest, Matt, is that we go and discuss it at a bar.
Ooh, can we have a coffee?
Maybe a coffee.
FTP is one thing, but we also talk a hell of a lot about power to weight ratio. The higher that ratio is, the better the climber you are going to be. So to take some current examples, like Chris Froome, Alberto, Contador and Nairo Quintana have enormously high functional threshold powers, but they also weigh next to nothing. So that's why they are world-class climbers.
So then, what about the riders with the biggest FTPs in the universe? So riders like Fabian, Cancellara and Tony Martin, who've got FTPs even bigger and higher than Chris Froome. So the question is, why don't those guys win the Tour de France? Well, the answer is because they're too heavy. Or is it really as simple as that?
Well, perhaps not, because both Tony Martin and Fabian Cancellara, at their very best, have proven in the past that they can sometimes keep up with the best climbers in the world on a single mountain. However, what they do seem to struggle with is replicating that over multiple mountains or on back-to-back days. So it seems like the extra weight they're carrying up those climbs compared to their adversaries, and therefore the enormous power they're having to put out to get up there with them, takes a bit more out of them and takes a bit more to recover from.
So recovery is a key component of cycling too. Not only do you need to be able to recover between mountains, but also between days and stages as well, if you've got any hope of ever winning a Grand Tour. But it's more complex than that. You need good endurance too.
Yes, you do. So there are riders in this world who've never made it to a professional level, but they do have a very high functional threshold power and they don't weigh very much. Set them off with the best riders in the world at the bottom of a single climb and they'll probably do very respectably, there or thereabouts. However, ask them to do exactly the same thing at the end of a 4-hour race or 2.5 weeks of intense racing at a Grand Tour and they probably won't fare quite so well. So you need to be able to have the ability to produce close to or on your functional threshold power even after you've already completed some very hard racing, and that is not something that many people can do.
So where does that leave the sprinters, the likes of Mark Cavendish and Marcel Kittel, for example? Well, their FTPs and power to weight ratios are relatively low when compared to the finest climbers and time trialists in the world, but compare them to the best amateurs in the world, and actually they compare pretty favourably. Well, in fact, their FTPs still have to be world class if they're ever going to be in a position to use their sprint at the end of a race.
Exactly. I mean, you don't win a race like Milan-San Remo unless you can produce a very high power for a decent period of time. And in fact, both of those riders are capable of producing good performances in shorter time trials and prologues. Kittel, in fact, was a double world champion as a junior in the time trial discipline, and Mark Cavendish has had lots of great results in prologues and short time trials. And also, you don't get to the end of the Tour de France and be able to sprint on the Champs-Élysées unless you've got a decent level of FTP.
So perhaps one of the characteristics of a really good road sprinter is the innate ability to put themselves into the red and then still deliver an effective sprint at the end of a race. So probably for periods of under 10 minutes, let's say, they're able to produce a higher percentage of their FTP than a good time trialist or climber.
And as we've already said, they wouldn't be winning any races if they didn't possess a very good FTP. If you could win races on the road without it, the likes of Sir Chris Hoy or Robert Forster would have forged incredible road careers because their peak sprint power is in fact quite a lot higher than that of Mark Cavendish or Marcel Kittel. No, those guys, those road sprinters, only look like bad climbers when they're compared to the very best that the world has to offer.
And finally, we have the puncheurs, the likes of Philippe Gilbert and Greg van Avermaet. Now, those guys might not necessarily be able to sprint with the best sprinters, time trial with the best time trialists, or climb with the purest of climbers, but what they do have is a superhuman ability to deliver power on short climbs.
Yeah, these beasts have the biggest disconnect between their functional threshold powers and the power that they're able to produce over short climbs of maybe 1 to 5 minutes in duration. They are anaerobic monsters. Not only have they got an amazing ability to go into the red, they can do it on a multitude of occasions over the course of a single race. And this, in fact, is kind of what made the Olympic road race in 2016 so fascinating, because really, Greg van Avermaet, on paper, should not have been able to win that race with the climbs involved. However, on the form of his life, he was able to dig deep, go into the red, stay with some of the best climbers in the world, and then easily outsprint them at the end. So, exactly how important then is FTP to road cycling performance? Well, as I think we've shown, it really depends on what you want to be good at. For a climber or a time trialist, it is incredibly important, but they also need the powers of recovery and endurance too. And if you want to be good at short climbs or sprints, you're still going to need a really good FTP in order to use that strength in the first place. Otherwise, you're either not going to get to the finish of a race, or you're going to get there too fatigued to use your strength.
Track racing, on the other hand, is a completely different beast altogether, and a subject perhaps for another video.
Yeah, I think we'll leave that because this discussion has been incredibly long and we're running out. Well, it's gone, yeah, it's dark.
Well, talking of videos and not missing any Global Cycling Network videos, how about subscribing to the channel? It's absolutely free if you haven't done so already. Tell your mates, and then you won't miss another video.
Yeah, do that by clicking on the globe. 2 more videos for you to watch now with all this talk about FTP. You'll probably want to know how to improve yours. You can find that by clicking in this corner just down here. On the other hand, if you want to see Mark Cavendish giving me tips on sprinting.
I do.
Yeah, well, click just there then, mate.
Oh, look at that. It's like a hologram of the video in front of me. Absolutely nuts.